The Anglo-American Loan Agreement was a post-World War II loan made to the United Kingdom by the United States on 15 July 1946, and paid off in 2006. The loan was negotiated by John Maynard Keynes. The loan was for $3.75 billion at a low 2% interest rate. Canada loaned an additional $1.19 billion. Background: the loan was made primarily to support British overseas expenditure in the immediate post-war years and not to implement the Labour government's welfare reforms. British Treasury officials believed they could implement the Labour government's domestic reforms without the loan if Britain withdrew from all major overseas commitments. Additionally, Britain's Lend-Lease balance was written off for $650 million. At the start of the war, Britain had spent the money that they did have in normal payments for materiel under the U.S. cash-and-carry scheme. Basing rights were also traded for equipment, e.g., the Destroyers for Bases Agreement, but by 1941 Britain was no longer able to finance cash payments and Lend-Lease was introduced. Large quantities of goods were in Britain or in transit when Washington suddenly and unexpectedly terminated Lend-Lease on 21 August 1945. The British economy had been heavily geared towards war production and had drastically reduced its exports. The UK therefore relied on Lend-Lease imports to obtain essential consumer commodities such as food, while it could no longer afford to pay for these items using export profits. The end of Lend-Lease thus came as a great economic shock. Britain needed to retain some of this equipment in the immediate post-war period. As a result, the Anglo-American loan came about. Lend-Lease items retained were sold to Britain at the knockdown price of about 10 cents on the dollar, giving an initial value of £1.075 billion. Agreement terms: John Maynard Keynes was sent by the United Kingdom to the United States and Canada to obtain more funds. British politicians expected that, in view of the United Kingdom's contribution to the war effort, especially for the lives lost before the United States entered the fight in 1941, America would offer favorable terms. Instead of a grant or gift, however, Keynes was offered a loan on favorable terms. Historian Alan Sked has commented that the U.S. didn't seem to realize that Britain was bankrupt, and that the loan was denounced in the House of Lords. But in the end the country had no choice. America offered $3.75 billion and Canada contributed another $1.19 billion, both at the rate of 2% annual interest. The total amount repaid, including interest, was $7.5 billion to the U.S. and $2 billion to Canada. The loan was made subject to conditions, the most damaging of which was the convertibility of sterling. Though not the intention, the effect of convertibility was to worsen British post-war economic problems. International sterling balances became convertible 1 year after the loan was ratified, on 15 July 1947. Within a month, nations with sterling balances had drawn almost $1 billion from British dollar reserves, forcing the British government to suspend convertibility and to begin immediate drastic cuts in domestic and overseas expenditure. The rapid loss of dollar reserves also highlighted the weakness of sterling, which was duly devalued in 1949 from $4.02 to $2.80. In later years, the term of 2% interest was rather less than the prevailing market interest rates, resulting in it being described as a very advantageous loan by members of the British government, as elaborated below. Repayment: the last payment was made on 29 December 2006 for the sum of about $83 million, the 29th being the last working day of the year. The final payment was actually 6 years late, the British government having suspended payments due in the years 1956, 1957, 1964, 1965, 1968 and 1976 because the exchange rates were seen as impractical. Quotes. The original size of the debt and repayment terms can be ascertained from the debates in the House of Commons on the 28th of February 2002 and House of Lords on the 8th of July 2002 as recorded in Hansard. Bob Spink, to ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer what outstanding liabilities there are to the United Kingdom of Lend-Lease loan facilities arranged during the Second World War. Ruth Gully, the information is as follows. Quote, under the agreement, the loans would be repaid in 50 annual installments commencing in 1950. However, the agreement allowed deferral of annual payments of both principal and interest if necessary because of prevailing international exchange rate conditions and the level of the United Kingdom's foreign currency and gold reserves. The United Kingdom has deferred payments on 6 occasions. Repayment of the war loans to the United States government should therefore be completed on the 31st of December 2006, subject to the United Kingdom not choosing to exercise its option to defer payment, as at the 31st of March 2001. Principal of £243,573,154 was outstanding on the loans provided by the United States government in 1945. The government intends to meet its obligations under the 1945 agreement by repaying the United States government in full the amounts lent in 1945. Similarly, Hansard records from a debate that took place in the House of Lords on 8 July 2002. Lord Campbell of Croy, my lords, is this payment part of the Lend-Lease scheme under which the United States supplied munitions, vehicles and many other requirements including food and other provisions that were needed badly by us in the last part of the war? Lord Mackintosh of Haringey, my lords, I referred to Lend-Lease in the context of the generosity of the United States throughout that period. However, the debt that we are talking about now is separate. It was negotiated in December 1945. Lord Stoddard of Swindon, my lords, will the noble lord remind me as to exactly how much the loan was, and how much we have repaid since then in principal and interest? Lord Mackintosh of Haringey, my lords, the loan originally was £1,075 million, of which £244 million is outstanding. The basis of the loan is that interest is paid at 2%. Therefore, we are currently receiving a greater return on our dollar assets than we are paying in interest to pay off the loan. It is a very advantageous loan for us. In television, Sir Christopher Mayer presented a history of the loan and its effects in the BBC series Mortgage to the Yanks. Mayer claimed that the loan was primarily needed to pay for the Labour government's welfare reforms.